Hey, and welcome to Matt and Jess TV. I am Matt Roast.
And I'm Jessica Bun Bun.
This is our reaction and review for Earth Abides, Episode 3. Now, one of the things we say a lot of the time on the channel when we cover quote-unquote limited series is that very often they only may be limited for so long because of ratings, X, Y, or Z. They may be brought back. This is one of the rare instances where as we got through this episode, I was like, oh yeah, for sure this is a limited series. They're not bringing this back for another season once you're jumping, more than a decade in time over the course of a given episode.
I can't remember a show. I can't put my
Yeah.
finger on a show that has jumped around as much as this one episode. I mean, the show itself has jumped around years, but
Yeah.
this episode really is like, oh, it's a 4 years, 6 years. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy.
Earth Abides is basically now post-apocalyptic This Is Us, where they went and found
Yes.
some sort of material that they may have ingested, and they're like, let's get crazy with the time jumps now. Let's go boom, 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 like all of these in one episode.
I love this show. The more
Wow.
that this show is going on, the more I love it, because there are not that many shows these days that have a bit of a slower, steadier pace where it's really about humans and human connections and the human condition. And, we've seen tons of these, last man, last woman on earth types of shows. And then in come the zombies, or in come, a group of terrible people doing terrible things. It's always about that. This is one of the very few times that it's like, okay, the end of the world has happened. Here are the last few people that are left that are trying to rebuild in a positive way. That there is a way to rebuild in a positive way. And I'm not saying everything is always just sunshine and rainbows. I mean, look at the end of this episode, what happened with Ish and the lion, or what happened last episode with the swarms of rats. Sometimes there are other threats that are going to be coming in that aren't necessarily people. And I understand that people are threats.
Yeah.
However, it's nice to just see something different where it's not just like, and in comes, Negan and the governor to ruin everything for everybody, and actually just watch humans needing other humans to survive, because that is the way it is.
I think this episode is a good reminder that, people are complicated. It's understandable that you may not want to trust people for X, Y, or Z reason, but
Of course.
they may also still bring something to the table. Like, I'll admit that there are some issues that I'm going to be trying to work through in this video when it comes to this episode. I'm going to treat this like therapy, and congratulations, everybody out there. You get to be a part of this as we go on. Before we do go forward, though, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because we will be here through the rest of Earth Abides, very clearly a limited series with more discussion as to every single thing that's going down.
Absolutely. And we've got Dexter that's going to be coming up. So if you hit that subscribe button and you're interested in our Dexter coverage, we've got that coming up. Severance not that long afterwards as well. And also, we are covering Dune Prophecy exclusively over on our Patreon. Is the only place you can get our weekly reviews. We'll leave a link for you below. And thank you to everyone who has joined. Okay, listen, before we get to all the good stuff, let's drag something. So the thing that I had the hardest part with was the cliffhanger from the last episode, where we saw the feet come up to see the sign that Emma had left to be like, hey, there's survivors. Here's our address. Come on by. I saw that cliffhanger and I was like, oh no, it's not innocent John from last week. It's going to be a problem. And then they started this episode with this humongous time jump of like 4 years. I was like, oh my God, now we're in year 6. What happened with the people that showed up? You guys aren't going to give me immediate feels of seeing how they met, what happened. Was there any sort of distrust with who showed up?
Innocent John, as it turns out, may have just been innocent Jorge, and that's exactly where we ended up going. Like, I like that character a lot, but
I like him too.
This is what I'm working through here, is that I like a lot of what the show brought in this episode. I think there's really interesting material and great moments, but I wanted more cliffhanger resolution, but in general, and this is very ironic given that the first two episodes were so slowly paced, I'm just sitting here watching this episode and I'm being like, why'd y'all skip over so much? Like, well, there's so many different things I wanted to see, and I don't know if this is trying to connect it to the source material because we haven't read it,
No.
or if this is a situation where it was like, okay, we know from the start this is a limited series. We only have the budget for 6 episodes, so we got to make the most of what it is that we have. But it did just feel like I was having to take a lot of time in this episode getting to know people on the fly. And when some of them, whether it's Maureen or Jorge, turn out to be these characters that are just like this innately likable, I just want to know more about them. I want to know their origin story. I want to see these friendships build up. And instead, we just rush into everything. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm just supposed to assume that everything has always been hunky dory between these people.
I guess we are, but I mean, Ish and Jorge's relationship, their friendship is so wholesome.
Yeah.
I'm not mad at it. It's fine. But what I also did really like was getting to know Maureen a little more, that she does have a bit more of a complicated past. And we learned it through Evie, who is this young child that Ish has come across, who's just kind of randomly running through the forest. They learn later that some not great things have happened to her. He's trying to lure her into his truck.
Yeah.
I was laughing through this. I'm like, we all know that Ish is a good guy,
Yeah.
but him being like, hey, look at me in my truck. Come back to my truck. I got apples. You want to come back to the truck?
No.
Like, he might as well have had like free candy written on the side of his van, being like,
Yeah.
come here, little girl.
It's just really funny how I don't know if Ish was always like this or if this is just in the time in which society has changed. He's kind of forgotten these things that you would not do in a normal society. And I think it's because
Yes.
it's him that he's such a well-intentioned, good person. It does make a lot of it funny. And I think that's what makes a
It
lot
did.
of, this episode so interesting is just that I think Ish is naturally good natured, but he has a lot of walls up. He has a lot of concerns. He has things that he actively does worry about, but then he has other times where he's willing to sort of overlook what perception may be of him and just be like, hey, Evie, you're just a kid. You come back with me. Everything is going to be fine. It's like, nothing's that easy, dude.
No, I mean, obviously she ends up getting into the back of the truck, but I mean, one of the things that he says to her is like, hey, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm a father. And
Yeah.
then we learn later that Evie's father wasn't that great to her.
Yeah.
So, was that the thing that really helped? No, it's probably more of the apple, and that's fine. But when she gets back there and she connects with Maureen, who sees some of the same scarring that she also has, she's like, okay, I kind of have an idea of what's gone on with this kid, and maybe I'm going to be able to sort of reach out. And Evie brings out something in Maureen that helps, ground her again and make her feel like she's sort of paying it forward and helping somebody else out that's gone through what she's gone through, which then in turn helps Jorge. And that's why for me,
Mhm.
I'm really enjoying this show because it is about human connection and how human connection can really help each other heal and build into better things. People need people.
Well, let's get a little bit into what happens as this episode goes along because, at first we have Ish and his little small but still larger family than it was years ago. But then we have more and more people starting to show up. We have the singer, we have the guy that the singer is with, who is just this particularly shady looking dude who Ish has some pretty big trust issues with almost right away.
Yeah, he's having a really hard time with how big the community is growing. And we have to remember that when we first met Ish, Ish was living alone and he was living alone in his cabin, finding his rocks, doing his work. And he lived alone for a really long time. And we, saw him in this episode talking about that, where it's like, okay, great. Like, I love my wife and my kids and, having Jorge here and, the community's growing and he's starting to get a little overwhelmed by it because he is a man that lived by himself for a really long time. And now those moments of being alone are kind of gone. And I understand that personally for myself because I'm somebody who lived alone for a very long time where it is just you in your place, doing what you want when you want. And then as you're living with someone else or more people or, family, everything's sort of growing and you start to lose some of that. And it is difficult to get it back or to find those moments. So to Ish, I'll just give you some advice of what I do to make sure that I still have a little bit of that time. You
All
got to
right.
get up before everybody else gets up and get your coffee and you just go into the backyard. No book, no phone, no nothing. Not that you have a phone. You just go into the backyard by yourself and you have your coffee before everybody's up. It's a way to still sort of ground yourself for those of you out there who are like me, who live by yourself for a really long time and you're comfortable with yourself and you kind of miss having that little bit of time for yourself. You still love everybody that's around you, but you need your alone time too.
I just feel a lot for Ish just because, in addition to everything he's feeling, he's just constantly in this place where he has to be seen as the leader, like, regardless of whether or not he wants to be the leader or whatever else. Just from the fact that he has sort of established a lot of this with Emma, he has a lot of knowledge that he's gotten from his time spent at the library. They're always going to look towards him. And that's a really tough place, I think, psychologically to be, where everybody is sort of looking up to you, looking at what you're doing, and then it kind of delivers this mindset of like, okay, if I make one mistake or I do this one thing wrong, what's everybody gonna think of me? And I think this works a lot into this big question of, oh, should I send these new people away? Because if Emma trusts these new people, or if other people like these new people, how are they then going to look at me? Is it going to cause a major change in how this household functions? Like, I know it's sort of brought up in this episode, this idea of, oh, well, Emma's really the one that's in charge, so Ish is going to do whatever she wants. And maybe that's it to a certain extent, but I also think it's more complicated than that. I think it's also the implication of, if he does this, not only what is Emma going to think, but what is everybody going to think?
Yeah, because if Ish really didn't want that address out there anymore, he would have gone and just taken it down at some point. There's no reason for it to still be up, except that Emma does want it up and she wants to continue to build the community. And Ish has agreed that that's okay. And everybody that's there now with Jorge and Maureen and everybody has agreed that this is okay and that they are going to continue to build this community and sort of build back civilization. Is there a way to continue on civilization if you're by yourself or if you're just with one other person? Well, it's difficult,
Yeah.
right? Like you do need other people to come in to sort of rebuild the world. And that's what Emma is really looking at, is like she wants to be surrounded in love. We all want to be surrounded in love.
Yes.
But then at the same time, you've got Ish who's like, yeah, I want to be surrounded by love, but sometimes I just want to have a minute.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing for Ish to sort of deal with and figure out. And I think the same can be said for, okay, Ish, because he's been sort of thought of as a leader, he's got all these sort of ideas in his head. It's like, okay, people are going to listen to me if I give them direction out in the field. And we get to this point where, Molly, who is one of the people who has turned up, she goes and she's able to find all this medication and she kind of goes rogue in the process of doing it. And he's just sort of like, oh, I don't know if you should do that. But at the end of the day, people are going to think for themselves sometimes, and you have to sort of cede a little bit of that control, even if you don't fully trust them, because the results may still be good. Like, there is a message here in this show of, it's okay to have a little bit of trust in people sometimes. Like, I understand fully what Ish is going through when it comes to having trust issues. I mean, I have that sometimes with new people. A lot of people have that sometimes with new people. But ultimately, at least with this show, some of them are proving that they can be trusted. I still don't know about that dude. I'm still kind of all over the place with that guy.
I think it's getting harder for Ish as well as they have more kids. And
Yeah.
now that they have all accepted everybody into this community, Gina's had a kid now, Maureen's had a kid now, like there's lots of kids. The community is really full. When now more people show up, how are they going to be able to deal with that? Because now it's not just one or two kids. Now
Yeah.
there's like a pile of children here. So what happens next time? Like, are they going to continue to get as lucky as they are, that it is just other survivors looking for other
Yeah.
survivors to find a way to have life with other people? And I think that with this show, that is what they are focusing on.
Yeah.
And, I've seen it in the comments that there are some people that are kind of like, oh, it's too like puppies and rainbows. Like, not everybody's a good person. Absolutely. That's true.
Yeah.
Not everybody's a good person. But I think that with this show, they just want to show that the human spirit cannot be broken, that you will be able to connect with other people in the worst of circumstances, that good can happen. And that's just the story that they want to tell here.
Here's one of the stupid things that I really would like, but I don't think we're going to have the time to get. It's just that, like, if more and more people do show up, what happens if this community suddenly gets 50 people, 60 people? Do you start to have to sort of play SimCity if you're Ish and you're like, okay, where are we going to put the school? Where are we going to have a specific building where we can take care of the six? Like, you have to sort of figure out how to world build at the same time as
Right.
you're continuing to be people. And I just think that's a very interesting idea to explore from just the ground level where, yeah, people may be quote unquote bad and that they make bad decisions sometimes. But this show, kind of like you said, it doesn't need to have a bunch of like mustache twirling villains out there cackling about destroying the community, because if you destroy the community, you're pretty much destroying everything. Like, what are you going to have to sit on a throne of nothing?
Yeah, and I think that it is interesting to watch community building and figuring some of those things out,
Yeah.
like education and
Yeah.
how are we going to teach our children, and what are we going to teach our children, because things are different now. Is money ever going to be coming back into play, or is that just not a thing? It is just everybody shares whatever and it doesn't have to be a thing.
Yeah.
Well, how do you continue to grow the world? But because we have been seeing so much positivity on this show, it was only a matter of time before something bad
Uh,
was going to happen. A more natural disaster has come in here where there's this huge storm.
yeah.
Lucky the dog has been left outside a second time. He was left outside with the rats that swarmed, and now he's been left outside again with the storm. Poor old man, this branch came down on him, and it's really the first time that Ish has had to deal with some sort of death of somebody since everything happened. Like, since he's moved on, his first companion. It was very hard to watch. I mean, I have a really old dog.
Yeah.
It's who's kind of coming to, not end of life, but definitely end of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, she's like 15 years old, 105 in dog years. She's got, limping limbs and, all that. I'm just like, oh man, looking at this poor Lucky, I was just like, oh man, my heart's breaking.
I'm not good with this stuff. Like, I can handle watching a lot of dark stuff, but this is always the thing that really gets me. So I mean, I'll be honest here. Like, the moment where I started to see how things were happening, I was just like, I don't know if I can watch this. I don't know if I need to close my eyes. I don't know if I need to mute it
Hard.
for a minute. Yeah, it's like all of this was really, really difficult, especially since I know how much I love that dog. And this dog was really the first connection that he made once all of this stuff really started. So, I mean, that hit me really hard in the stomach. And I think it probably hit a lot of people who were out there watching. And obviously, that's the point. They want to get us really invested in these characters in this world that is being built.
And the dog is named Lucky. So for me, I'm wondering if this is the show giving us a sign that their luck is finally going to be changing. Because after we lose Lucky, some really bad luck came in for Ish.
Yeah, there could be some symbolism there. I mean, it's a lion, everybody. And I'll be honest, when the Paramount Plus show Lioness was first announced, I was kind of like, where are the lions at? Like, where are we going to see some? Because I didn't know Lioness was an actual problem. But here we have an actual lion. And on the surface, it's kind of easy to be like, okay, this is ridiculous. What is a lion doing out in this part of the world? They're not native, but it's like, okay, there's zoos, there's other stuff
Absolutely.
that existed, and we know how well, predator animals can survive in nature. This is not the polar bear in Lost. Like, this is something that is legitimate, that could happen, and how you deal with that is a pretty big deal. Like, I'll be honest, I'm not sitting here and being like, is this show about to take out it? It's like, no, they're not going to get rid of Alexander Ludwig before the end of this. I have a very hard time believing it.
I feel like they won't.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, it is a limited series. Would they do something like that? Maybe. I don't think they will, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I mean, you've got Evie who wasn't speaking at all. She's saying her first words, which are help, 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 help.
Yeah.
She doesn't know what to do. I mean, she's trying to get some sort of help out there, but it's just being pulled apart by a lion. Like, how far away is she from everybody else? She's not running to get anybody else. She's not able to actually step in and do anything. Is this the end? It could be.
What I think would happen here, once again, don't know the books, but I feel like there has to be consequences of this. Like, it shouldn't be that all of a sudden Ish is just Jack Reacher and he just destroys every single thing that comes along his
Right,
path.
right.
I think, do you have a broken leg? Do you have some sort of other injury? Like, I think
Yeah.
you have something that makes the rest of his life different to some degree, and that's just sort of something that he has to deal with, because I don't want to lose Ludwig, but you have to make a cliffhanger like this matter. And because, as you mentioned earlier, we already had a cliffhanger that at the end of the day really did not matter that much.
Yeah, and I mean, we did have this whole part of this episode where Molly had found all the medicine and brought it back and was like, listen, I'm a doctor. I
Yeah.
have medicine. Like, that's got to come into play. It felt like foreshadowing to something that might come into play. And here we are. I mean, he was really getting ripped apart.
Yeah, and so I'm hoping that he'll pull through this so that we can enjoy the rest of this show when we jump forward 40 years in the
I
finale. We
know.
have Ludwig's going to be out here looking like Joel Kinnaman from For All Mankind on this past season. I don't know how much further we're going to go forward in time, but this show seems to just be a lot about, the nature of humankind, the
Yeah.
evolution, how they're able to find their way back. And it's a really interesting watch. It's really compelling, emotional. There's not necessarily like the highest stakes in the world going on screen, which is kind of funny given that we basically had the end of the world in the pilot, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you guys don't miss any of the rest of our coverage of Earth Abides. And you can support us further by joining our Patreon. We have that link in the description where we're doing exclusive Dune Prophecy videos over there.
Mhm.
Thank you guys so much for your support. We'll see you here next time.